Okay. Right here. All right, so we're on chapter 13. So if you want to have your book open while we're going through this and follow along, fantastic. Chapter 13 is about the brain. Now, it's really kind of sad for me that we don't get to go to the cadaver lab this year. I think you're missing a fantastic opportunity, but it's got nothing to do with us here at the school. So the college where we go to is a medical school, right? It's a teaching college. It's obviously a teaching college. It's a teaching hospital, but they do have cadaver labs there, which we usually go to every year. But because of COVID, they're isolating themselves for good reason. I mean, they don't want to get their medical students exposed to a potentially dangerous disease. But one of the most profound things that I've found when you go to an actual human cadaver, rather than, we'll use sheep brains here, but when you use an actual human cadaver, if you hold a human brain in your hand, it's really, really profound to me to think that every single emotion, every single feeling, every single thought, every single memory that person had was located in this lump of nervous tissue that you're holding in your hand, right? That was everything that made that person who they are. And it's just a bunch of nervous tissues, right? It's synapses, it's acetylcholine, it's dopamine, it's serotonin, it's axons. It's really neat to think about. Okay, so look at the screen here, and you can see some structures. And I'm going to draw on the board here behind me too, and I'll talk about some of these things, some of the basics. So first of all, the brain. This is hard to do when you guys aren't here and I don't have an actual brain, to be dissecting and showing you. But I'll do the best I can with the board. When you guys come in, we'll do the actual brain. All right. So when you look at that structure right there, this is a mid-sagittal. This is a mid-sagittal section is what you're looking at. So if you're looking at this later, it's on slide 13.2 here, 13-2. Brain and cranial nerves. So this is the mid-sagittal section. So if you recall, a mid-sagittal section is right down the middle. So this is your sagittal plane, right? Sagittal plane. Mid-sagittal is right down the very center. And that's what you're looking at here. So right down here, open it up and look and see what you're looking at. So let's see, make sure I'm on the screen here. You guys can see me all right? Yeah, we can see you fine. Good. All right. So we're going to start here. So this is the cortex, or the main part of the brain, right? So the cerebrum, the main part of the brain. The cerebrum has a cerebral cortex around the outside, right? Cerebral cortex around the outside. That's where a lot of the magic happens. We'll get into that in a minute. On the back side, so there's different lobes. When you guys get here, we'll talk about the lobes. On the dorsal side of the brain, there's a big bump back there, and that's the cerebellum. Okay? The cerebellum is responsible for motor movement and coordination. So when you guys are learning how to walk, dribble a basketball, throw a football, whatever, that's happening back here at the cerebellum. And there's a really cool structure inside of this. So if this is a section, there's a really cool structure in here. It's called the arbor vitae, which translates into the tree of life. And that's white matter. There's little white matter inside of the cerebellum. And does anybody remember the difference between white matter? I hope you do. The difference between white matter and gray matter. What is white matter? Lane, what's white matter?
Myelinated axons.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah, it's myelinated axons. That's right. So that's white matter. That's myelinated axons, and it's surrounded by gray matter, which are the cell bodies. Okay. So if you're looking at the picture here, if you're looking at slide 13.2, let me just change my pointer here. This is the cerebellum right there. Okay, that's the cerebellum right there. Okay, now in front of the cerebellum, we've got something called the brainstem. The brainstem consists of the medulla oblongata, the midbrain, and then the pons right here. Okay, so if you're looking at your screen here, this is the pons, midbrain, medulla oblongata there. Okay, and then up above that, so this is the pons here. Right? Up above that, and this is gonna become your spinal cord, right? So this is gonna exit your skull through a big hole called the what? Anybody remember the name of the big hole in the brain that the spinal cord exits through? Alyssa, do you remember? Ms. Riegelman?
No.
Okay, and does anybody remember the name of the big hole in the bottom of the skull? Right here. Remember the name of that big hole?
Is it the Foramen Magnum?
Perfect, it is. Very good. It's the foramen magnum. So that would be the foramen magnum right there. Okay, so visualized on this would be right here. Okay? Okay, so that's the pons. And then up above that, we have something called the diencephalon. And the diencephalon is composed of the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the subthalamus. Okay, so that's the thalamus there. Right? And you can see that structure right here. Okay, well, I kind of missed it highlighting right here. Okay. Now, above that, now here's what I want to talk to you a little bit in depth about today. So we'll finish the brain here. So then we've got a little structure here called an infundibulum. And an infundibulum is a stalk that attaches the pituitary gland to the rest of the brain. Okay. You can see it right there's the pituitary gland. Okay. Now, up above the diencephalon, we've got something called the corpus callosum or corpus callosum. And this is a commissural fiber. So this is white matter. Okay? It's a commissural fiber. And what this does, it's corpus callosum, and it allows right to left side communication. Okay? Right to left. Right and left side communication. That's called the corpus callosum. And that's a ventricle. So if you look here, what I just drew is this right here that I'm highlighting now. Okay? That's the corpus callosum. And then underneath that, there's an association fiber right here, an association fiber, and that is called the fornix. The fornix. And that allows front to back communication of the brain. Okay? Front to back communication of the brain. Corpus callosum, right to left. This right here, this space is a ventricle. Okay? So it's an empty space. Well, it's not empty, but I'll get this in a second. So if I were to do a coronal section now, a coronal section. So this is mid-sagittal, right, like this. If I were to do a coronal section, right, along my top of my head, down through my ear, like that, and look at the brain. So I would have both lobes, or both sides, both hemispheres of the brain, right? I'd go up like that, and then I'd have pituitary gland to be able to see hanging down there, and then I would have the pons here, right? Midbrain, and then medulla oblongata, and then that would go out through the foramen magnum. Okay, so this is it cut this way. Okay, and then back behind that, I would have the cerebellum. Okay, cerebellum. And it's connected to all this by cerebellar peduncles. We'll talk about that later. Okay, so pons, cerebellum, and then this would be the cerebrum. And then now we're looking at this. Okay, so we looked at that, we would see corpus callosum, this up here, right? Corpus callosum, like that. And then the fornix would be here, fornix F floor, right? Corpus callosum, C for ceiling. Right? It's the floor and the ceiling of the room. Fornix, floor, corpus callosum, ceiling. All right, so that would then have a membrane going like this. And that's called septum pellucidum. Septum pellucidum. Septum pellucidum is going to divide these ventricles, so it's a big ventricle, right? Into the right and left ventricle, or first and second ventricles. And these are going to be full of cerebral spinal fluid. Does anybody remember the name of the glial cell that's responsible for producing cerebral spinal fluid? Starts with an E. So it's epididymal cells. Epididymal cells. So inside of here, okay, inside of here, this is lined, and you can see them. We do the dissection. You'll be able to see them. They look fuzzy. This is lined with epidermal cells. And those structures that they make, so epidermal cells, get a whole bunch of them, and that's called choroid plexus. So choroid plexus is a structure within the ventricles that's made up of epidermal cells that produces cerebral spinal fluid. Okay? Now, once cerebral spinal fluid is produced, it has to move. You can't just produce a bunch of cerebral spinal fluid and then say, okay, just keep going. You've got to get it out or you'll get a buildup of pressure. And if that happens, oftentimes it happens right in here. So there is a little hole, and it's called the interventricular foramen. An interventricular foramen. And what that hole does, it allows cerebral spinal fluid to go through the interventricular foramen, and then it moves along something called the cerebral aqueduct. Cerebral aqueduct. You guys have heard of Roman aqueducts, right? They solved the problem of planned cities needing water by bringing water in from streams through aqueducts. Same thing. This is carrying fluid, but in this case, cerebral spinal fluid. So it's a cerebral aqueduct. All right? So cerebral spinal fluid is going to go from the lateral ventricles, right and left, first and second, whatever you want to call them, through the interventricular foramen, between ventricles, the hole between the ventricles, interventricular foramen, through the cerebral aqueduct, down here to the third ventricle, and then continue along to the fourth ventricle. Okay? So that's the path of cerebral spinal fluid. Now, if the cerebral aqueduct gets plugged, and this happens, or the interventricular foramen gets plugged, you get a buildup of pressure because the epidermal cells of the choroid plexus don't stop, right? They don't stop. So they keep on building up. Pressure will increase. Well, right underneath this structure, so you have up here, you've got your olfactory bulbs. That's CN1. That's for smelling. Okay? But underneath that, you've got your optic tracts. And your optic tracts cross over and become the optic chiasm, and then they become the optic nerve, which becomes your eyeball. Okay? So that's CN2, cranial nerve 2. Right, your eyeball. So the first doctors to notice if you get a buildup of cerebral spinal fluid, oftentimes, not always, of course, oftentimes are your ophthalmologists. Anybody know what an ophthalmologist is? What an ophthalmologist studies? What's an ophthalmologist a doctor of? Eyes, right. That's right. So when they're looking in the eyes, right, and they're looking back, there's something called the fovea capitis. That's the concentration of the center of concentration, like where the retina goes back in. They can see something in there, and they know it's not right. And I don't have the training of an ophthalmologist, right? So I'm not going to tell you exactly what they see, but they do see something in there, and it's because the pressure inside of here builds up and puts pressure on that optic nerve or that optic tract. Okay? All right, so cerebral spinal fluid, we went through that. That's the corpus callosum, front to back, or right to left communication. The fornix, front to back communication. Thalamus, subthalamus, hypothalamus, that makes the diencephalon. Pons. Pons is a really, really kind of an important little thing there. Pons is responsible for a lot of different stuff. So sleep. So there's something called reticular formation in there, and that's your sleep-wake cycle. But a lot of ascending and descending tracks are running through that. Okay. Anything else for basics I wanted to go over today? So one more thing on your brain. So your brain, the surface of the brain here, the cerebral cortex, the outer layer of anything. If it says cortex, that always means the outer layer, right, the outside. So cerebral. This is the cerebrum, right? Everything up here, cortex, so that's the outside. Okay? It's made up of bumps, like ridges and valleys, like this. And that's so you can increase the surface area to volume ratio. You can pack more in there. The hills, that's real important. The hills are called gyri. So this is a gyrus. Okay? And the valleys, those are called sulci. So that's a sulcus. And these are going to be important landmarks. The brain topography is actually quite important. Okay, where stuff is on the brain. Okay, so so we will. What I want you guys to do. You want to go start going over some of this stuff? You want to write it down? Are you ready for that, or you want to be ready for that tomorrow? You want to print this out and get ready for me to start? Because I just spit out like 15 of these things. If you were paying attention, you could have wrote them down. 10 or 15. Let's go just a little bit more. We'll do the membranes. Okay, we'll do the meninges. So you guys, these are the ones you guys should be familiar with, right? So this is surrounded. So this is the brain and the spinal cord and the spinal nerves, which we did, the spinal cord, the spinal nerves. So you guys know this, right? It's surrounded by meninges, by three membranes. Let's go from superficial to deep. So if this is the skull, I'll use this one. So if this is the skull, right here. All right, so if that's the skull, that's a weird looking skull. Like this should be way back here. There's the scale. So if this is the skull right here, what would be the first space? So if I got a drill, don't do this at home, ladies and gentlemen. But if I got, let's say, I got a drill because I'm doing a surgery that's really important. Let's say I'm doing a deep brain stimulation surgery. Okay, so there's my drill. Okay, and I'm going in. All right, so I get through the skull. What's the first space that I'm going to come against? The first space I'm going to enter after the skull. Oh no. Epidural. So that's going to be the epidural space. And then what membrane? So I'm going superficial to deep. So I got the epidural space, and then what? What membrane?
Dura.
Thank you. Yeah, the dura mater. And I'm going to keep going with my drill. Now I'm going to come into another space, and what's that? Subdural. Good, Ben. Yeah, subdural space is there. And I'm going to keep going with my drill, and I'm going to come up against another membrane, and what's that? Another meningeal layer. Arachnoid mater is the membrane, and then subarachnoid space. Good. So arachnoid mater, subarachnoid space, and then what's the delicate? So we've got durable mother, dura mater. We've got arachnoid mater, the spider web mother, and then we've got lastly, right up against, after the subdural space, after the subarachnoid space, what do we have next? Lastly. Good. The gentle mother, pia mater, right? And that's going to be right up against the surface of the brain. Okay, so our cerebral spinal fluid is going to be in here. Cerebral spinal fluid. Okay, flowing around town, right? Down through here, following the spinal cord down, following the spinal nerves out, right? Inside the epineurium, right? Hope you guys remember all that stuff. Okay. So let's just, real quick PowerPoint here. So brain, we know it's part of the central nervous system. I'm on slide 13-3, if you're following along on the YouTube video here. And then parts of the brain, brainstem, we went over that. Cerebellum, went over that. Diencephalon, we went over that. Cerebrum, we went over that. That's the outside, around the outside, around the outside. And then cranial nerves, remember those are ones that come off of the brain directly, the brain of the brainstem. And there are 12 of those, and there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves, right? So right here, that's your olfactory, that's cranial nerve 1. Cranial nerve 2 is not shown here, but it would be down here, and that would be the optic nerves. And then all these looking spaghetti things, that's spaghetti. That's the rest of your cranial nerves. So CN1, I don't know why they don't have it highlighted there. It's CN1, CN2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12. Okay. You know what? That's good. So it's 10 till. I'll let you guys go. So here's all your cranial nerves. You should know what each of these do, what they're responsible for. That's not hard. But yeah, here's the section Here's the cross section. Okay, so yeah, start writing some definitions down on that lab practical sheet. We'll reconvene tomorrow, and be ready, man. I'm gonna go over all this stuff. All you gotta do is write it down as I say it. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, Friday we come in, brain dissection, identifying these pieces and parts during the class. I want you guys to start studying your functions, so I want to be able to do the practical, maybe not Friday, but Tuesday when you guys come in. Okay? All right, if you guys don't have any questions, I will enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place.